How's it going? I just want to ramble a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. So, the retrospective from 1965 until current day that I've been doing, sharing music and pop culture moments, I have been coming to terms with the amount of mind control that I have been under personally from the time I was born, growing up watching television, going to public school. I can go on and on. And it's been difficult to admit these things, right? It's not easy to admit when we're fooled. Our egos have to die. And that's part of my spiritual journey, of course, being a child of the Most High Yah and knowing that egos don't do well in the presence of Yah. So checking your ego is healthy and a part of wellness, I'll just say. So I have noticed that a lot of the movements and whatever has been rage baiting us over the decades, it hasn't been organic. It hasn't been a grassroots movement. Everything is processed. A lot like the food that we eat here in America, which it rage baits me. That's one of my biggest ragers, is to go to the supermarket and I want to just take bread from the shelves and just throw it and stomp on it, you know? I want to crash out because when I read the labels, all the chemistry involved, it makes me angry because I've watched the aftermath. And I also lived through a time where the American food supply was better. It was more pure, less processed. So those are things that I grow nostalgic for. And one of the things that I realized about nostalgia is that when we look back at the decades, and I realize the younger people need to feel a sense of nostalgia right now because we're so dystopian, postmodern, that the only decade to hearken back to is the 50s because of its perceived purity. But I can say that, I mean, I know those times weren't perfect, but the families were more intact and marriages were intact. And I know you'll hear the other side talk about, well, they weren't perfect marriages and women were being abused. And yeah, that could be true, but that doesn't account for the fact that no-fault divorce really did have an effect on broken homes. So I can't be debated in that area. I know it had an effect. So yeah, so I'm moving through the 70s per se, and I'm about to get into the 80s. So with everything going on, we're witnessing, like I said, a lot of corruption. You've heard about what's going on in the NBA with the gambling. And gambling is one of those addictions that people, they justify it. They give it a pass because we have Vegas and we have Atlantic City. In fact, I just talked about Atlantic City and all the changes that came through. Growing up, going to Atlantic City as a child, it was a family destination. We had great times, my family. And, walking the boardwalk, eating the saltwater taffy, it was more innocent. And then you have the casinos coming in, in the 70s and everything changing. And like I shared, I witnessed watching the news in Philadelphia. If you remember, let me know. They would show the graphic nature of the warfare that was going on between the Italian crime mob families. And we'd hear all the names. And in Philadelphia, we know about our mob families, and some of us have rubbed shoulders with them, okay? I've gone to school with some mobsters' grandchildren. I had one of the grandsons tell me, he was a friend of mine, and he said, you know, Jen, if anybody ever does anything to you, I'll break them up, okay? Just let me know. And I'm thinking, oh, thank you, but yes, no thank you. So I never told him anything about any problems I was having. Breaking somebody up, what does that even mean, right? But no thanks, right? I really appreciate the camaraderie and everything. So it was nothing to turn the news on, which I had to watch the news in the evenings, and see gangsters in cars with their heads, you know, I can't, the unalived, I have to say that, unalived in the cars, because they'd have these turf wars over Atlantic City. So the whole mobster thing, I know, is romanticized. And a lot of guys love The Godfather and all that stuff, and I never understood that. I can't vibe with that. It's never my thing. But I understand that it's entertaining to some people. And they romanticize these illicit, clandestine groups. And maybe because my background is what it is, I don't romanticize these things. In fact, I have quite the opposite outlook on these things, because my family has been involved in illicit business. So back in, you would say, the 1800s, early, the beginning of the turn of the century and all of that, the early 1900s, and even into the 30s and 40s and stuff. My grandmother, in fact, in Chicago, she was from Atlanta, but in Chicago, I've mentioned this, I don't try to hide this stuff, and I'm not proud of it either. But my grandmother, her husband, he had nightclubs in Chicago, and I've heard whispers. My father told me that they were fronts for the mafia, and he died young. She was widowed, and I never met him, but she was part of Chicago's society, high society. And one of my uncles, Uncle Frank in Chicago, he owned lots of property, like whole blocks of property of those big stone, architecture, Tartarian, you like to call it, but they owned this stuff. But my Uncle Frank, he told my father, never, ever, ever get involved with the mafia, because there is no way out. And my father told me that he always warned my father never to get entangled. Now, my Uncle Frank, from what I understand, he was involved in some capacity. That was understood, okay? And I just want to talk about some of this stuff because it is interesting when I think about the birth of this nation and my ancestors and just the unique experience that we have had in America. But I want to pick up part 2, okay, of this little share, okay, my little Jen talk. So picking up part 2, I just wanted to say that the romanticizing of the illicit underworld activities, I never got it, but I know growing up, even on my other grandmother's side, Friends of the family. You hear the whispers that so-and-so is a number runner. And they do this not in the neighborhood. They do this stuff down in another part of Philadelphia. So they don't bring that work up to their neighborhood and their home. That's something I noticed. They'd have a good image, front facing, public facing. And the women were very traditional, beautiful women, kept a beautiful home. But they weren't flashy also, a lot of them. I mean, you knew that some people were doing really well. Like my grandmother in Chicago and my aunts and uncles up there. They were doing well. Very well. That's why a lot of the narratives of American history don't make sense. Because some of my family in Chicago, when they talk about all these ships and slave ships and stuff like that, these people were riding steamships going to Europe for vacations. So what kind of slave ship kind of stuff? This is like the 1800s. They were traveling, some of them, via steamship. So I see a lot of holes in narratives. And I guess I look at a lot of corruption now and realizing that we're in a place of reckoning because things can't sustain the way they are, and they're just coming to the surface and being exposed. And we're watching a lot of idols be exposed and fall. And I know a lot of times people, they get into their feels and everything being racial. They'll say, why is it that, this is what I'm hearing, people are asking, why is it only the black athletes that you're hearing all this investigation about? And they have to make it a black and what about them? What about them? And I just have a problem with it because I know that my people, they exchanged the Most High Yah, a lot of them, in exchange for the Roman gods. The Roman gods. They align with Greek and Roman gods. And they justify this. And this is for the promotion of, to attain, to gain the world and what the world has to offer, the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh. These are insatiable things, fame and power. And in pursuit of these things and trading the Most High Yah for Roman gods and making oaths, binding souls, talk about soul ties, and then wonder when it doesn't go well, because it never does, because we don't read contracts really well. We don't understand them. We don't read the fine print, the hidden language. To know that possibly, this is my theory about why is it always this. It's because certain people were never supposed to align with gods, plural. We're never supposed to do that. And some people, those are their gods. They know it. They're very upfront about it. That's their culture. But when it's not yours and you sign up And you didn't read the whole contract to know that in the end it would be a trick bag, because you're dealing with a trickster. It would be a trick bag. And maybe perhaps all of the goat stuff, the goat talk, maybe that was all a trick bag too. Maybe these people that have contracted with you, maybe they always knew that you'd be the scapegoat. You'd be the one holding the bag. And so that goat talk, maybe that's scapegoat. And maybe that's why it's always certain people that are always the face of certain things, is because they were supposed to know better and do better and be a shining light on top of a hill of righteousness, of valor, truth and beauty, loyalty, all of the goodness. Maybe that was supposed to be the flex. Maybe that was the assignment. It wasn't to be flashy and illuminated, fake, false light, but to have the real light, not the light bearer, but the light of the world, illuminated through you. That's real stuff. The other stuff is all fake. You know, when I think about money and all this stuff about money, when is it enough? And is it real? Because I think about landowners, people that really know their lineage and bloodline and their inheritance. They've done the work to know. And it can be defended only when we do right and we stand up and we align with the laws of the Most High Yah, and we abide and do everything that's required. Because yeah, it's a reckoning. It's clearly a reckoning. I feel that this retrospective has been really amazing to see exactly the root cause analysis for a lot of our going off course and needing a course correction, a reset. I want to talk about another subject coming up about old money, the whole issue of old money and the illusion of old money when it comes to American history. And this whole just aesthetic and identity, because I see it playing out in popular culture in ways that are just so concerning. But thank you for listening. Share your thoughts. I love to read your remarks. Take care.